Hello guys and welcome to another video. The Sun and the Star, a book co-written by Riordan and Mark Oshiro, is coming out early May, which is right around the corner. For those of you who, for some reason, still don't know what this book is going to follow the adventures of Nico Di Angelo and Will Solace after the events of the last book in the Trials of Apollo, The Tower of Nero. At the beginning of the year, they re-released The Sword of Hades with a sneak peek into the first chapters of The Sun and the Star. And in case you hadn't guessed it, that's what we're looking at today. So without further ado, let's read the first few chapters of The Sun and the Stars, coming out very soon. If you follow me on my channel, you know that I want some good Solangelo content to bleach my brain of what I read last month. In the latest bad fanfic from Wattpad that I read, please go check that one out. It was mind-blowing. It was about Percy becoming Christian and that's solving all his problems, and then the gods being the literal devil from the Bible. So check that one out, but for now, let's see the first chapters. So everyone was going crazy putting spoilers on Twitter, but I managed to avoid most of them, except this one. At the beginning of the book, it says, "To all the Nikos, Wills, Pipers, and everyone in between, this is for you. May you shine as bright as the sun and the stars." And it's so nice. Obviously, it's talking about all the known important LGBTQ+ characters that are in the Riordanverse. And it's really meaningful, especially because Mark Oshiro is also part of the collective. Also, I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Spoilers for the beginning of The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro from this point on. Okay, let's read this. Nico Di Angelo, why don't you tell me a story? Nico bristled at that. A story? Any old story? That seemed too easy after everything they'd been through. After all the suffering. He looked to Will briefly, and his boyfriend arched an eyebrow. He looked tired, too tired, and his bandages... Nico's stomach rolled. The gauze strips were soaked through with blood again. Not a good start. What happened to poor Will? He turned back to Gorgira. That's what we're going with. A story about what? He asked. The nymph examined Nico's face, then Will's. Was she going to pull soul threads out of them again? Again? What does that mean? Nico felt something brush his knuckles. He glanced down and saw that Will was trying to hold his hand. He opened his fingers and let Will slip his in between. As much as I hate my favorite couples going into Tartarus, I love the tender moments that we get to see from them. Ooh! Nico's heart sank. Will's grief was very weak. No. Everyone's fan theorizing that Will is definitely dying in this book. Not me though. I'm holding on to hope. Will is not dying. Rick, if Will dies, go back quickly, change it, reprint all the books. Don't let Will die. Nico had to do this. He had to finish what they had started. The whispers called out to him, and then Gorgira did too. "Tell me about the two of you," she said. I kind of love this, that we start with the beginning or the end of the story, and then we flash back to the beginning, and we're being told in a chronological order, and we're just on the edge of our seats, wondering how we got to the part that we were at the beginning. So let's keep reading chapter 1. Nico faced the worst decision of his life, and he was certain he was going to mess it up. This is going to be a misdirect, probably. "I can't do this," he said to Will Solace, the stunningly beautiful son of Apollo who stood across from him. But it was Austin Lake, one of Will's half-siblings, who Nico chose to focus on. He was pacing behind Will, which only made Nico more nervous. "Stop moving, Austin," Nico said. "I can't concentrate." "Sorry, dude," said Austin. "This is just so stressful." "You gotta choose," Will said to Nico. "Those are the rules." Okay, obvious misdirect. I'm going to bet that they're playing Monopoly or something stupid like that. Nico frowned. "I'm the son of Hades. I don't live by most rules." "But you did agree to these," said Kyla Knowles, another child of Apollo. She swirled a cherry lollipop in her mouth. "Are you a demigod without honor, Nico Di Angelo?" Austin kept pacing. "To be fair, I don't think this task requires any actual honor." Okay. Definitely a misdirect. "Quiet," said Nico, running his hands through his hair. What if he made the wrong choice? Would Will be disappointed in him? But studying Will's face, Nico saw only anticipation, the good kind. Will was ready for whatever Nico would say, and no matter how this ended, Will would still I'm sorry, I can't stop smiling, okay, I'll try to read properly. Will would still think just as highly of him. What did I ever do to deserve him? Nico wondered. He asked himself that question a lot. Okay, I've made my decision, said Nico. I might explode, said Austin. He's dramatic, I like him. The world might end, said Kayla, now holding the lollipop at her side, her eyes bright with anxiety. Like, actually end this time? So, said Nico, if I had to choose... Yes, prompted Will. You would choose? Nico took a deep breath. Darth Vader, I knew it! I knew it was stupid! I love them. Will and Kayla groaned, but Austin looked like Nico had just given him a Ferrari as a birthday present. Dude, Austin screamed. That is the best answer. That is the worst answer, said Kayla. Why would you choose Vader when Kylo Ren is right there? Are they choosing, like, bad guys that they would date? I was hoping for a deep cut, Will mused. Maybe someone like General Grievous or Driven Voss. Hold on, said Nico. I just finished watching all those movies yesterday. I can barely remember what happened in the prequels at this point. He paused. Were those all actual characters in Star Wars, or are you joking? Don't distract from your truth, Nico, said Kayla. Darth Vader? You'd go on a date with Darth Vader? She crunched all her lollipop. I've lost all joy, Nico. All of it. Honestly, I wouldn't go on a date with Darth Vader. I would rather go on a date with Anakin, even though he's super angsty and hates sand. Welcome to my world, Nico joked. He caught Will grimacing, a brief flicker of one, but he still caught it. I take it back, said Kayla. It's an all-judgment space. You're very quiet, Will, said Nico, especially as the #1 Star Wars fan in the group. I'm considering all the reasons why you'd give that answer, he said. You might be onto something. He's powerful, said Nico. And decisive, added Will. He'd always know exactly where to go for your date. No arguing about that. Does he take off his helmet to eat? Said Kayla. Nico laid his hand over his heart. Imagine Darth Vader removing his helmet over dinner and then staring longingly into your eyes over the table. Now that is romance. Wait a damn minute. I never thought that we would get to the point in Percy Jackson continuity that we would get to read Nico saying those words. This is crazy. Mark Oshiro, we thank you for your service. It's just so clear to me that there's another influence besides Rick in these words. Just from the beginning, I could tell, and I'm already loving the mix. God, this book is gonna make me cry. Will laughed hard, then flashed that brilliant smile of his. Oh, just thinking about watching them in the show if we ever get to this, which I don't think we ever will, but wouldn't that be something? Why oh why did it feel like such a victory to make Will laugh? For a long time, Nico had assumed he himself did not have a heart. He was the son of Hades after all. Love didn't find people like him, but then came Will. Will, who could melt Nico's iciness with a smile. Anyone could have guessed which god was Will's father. He radiated energy and light, sometimes literally, and as they had learned in the Troglodytes cavern earlier that year. Okay, so we're not very far away from where we left off in Tower of Nero chronologically. Will was Apollo's son through and through. Maybe that whole saying about opposites attracting was true because Nico didn't know a single person who was more his opposite. Despite that, they were coming up on a year together. Nico had an actual boyfriend. He still wasn't sure he believed it was real. The 4 demigods continued their talk through Camp Half-Blood. There was no fire in the amphitheater. Maybe since it was starting to cool down on Long Island, Nico and Will would light one tonight. No campers were rushing off to the armory or the forge. No one was visiting the Cave of the Oracle. The cabins were empty aside from Hades and Apollo's, and that was the clearest sign summer was over. Nico didn't want to admit it out loud, but he was going to miss, well, pretty much all the campers, even though it was at times exhausting to be one of their counselors. He especially didn't want to say goodbye to Kayla and Austin. Pause, how old is Nico right now? I have no clue. I'm guessing, was he 14 at the end of the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, which would make him like 15 in Heroes of Olympus, which I'm guessing makes him 16 here. I think 16 is a good age for this story. It's like Percy and Annabeth at the end of theirs. It's like Percy and Annabeth in The Last Olympian. So I think that's a good age. I wonder if he'll confirm it because Rick never knows what Nico's age is. As they passed through the strawberry fields, Nico sensed Kayla's and Austin's tension growing. They'd had to make a difficult decision about their travel arrangements earlier that day, and as the 4 of them climbed Half-Blood Hill, Kayla and Austin slowed. I'm thinking that maybe we should have chosen differently, said Kayla. I'm sure we'll be fine. Nico? Asked Austin. Yeah, he said. I mean, no one has ever died or anything. That's not nearly as comforting as you think it is, said Kayla. You'll be okay, said Will, and he put his hand on Austin's shoulder. I've heard it's chaotic, maybe a bit nauseating, but you'll make it home safely. Are they gonna use Nico's chauffeur? They reached the summit of the hill where the golden fleece glittered and the lowest branch of the pine tree. Below, Farm Road 3.141 curved around the base of the hill, defining the outer border of the camp. On the gravel shoulder next to a pile of boxes and duffel bags stood Chiron, the Camp Half-Blood Activities Director, his equine lower half gleaming white in the afternoon light. There you are, the centaur called out. Come along then. Are they gonna travel on Chiron? I don't think he really likes carrying humans on his back, so what's happening? None of them hurried. It was obvious to Nico that Kayla and Austin weren't in a rush to leave camp. Most everyone else had already returned to their normal lives, except, well, what was normal for someone like Nico? Epic battles, constantly facing the threat of defeat and death, the dead talking to him, prophecies. The voice from his dreams bubbled up inside him again now, calling out for help. Rachel Dare's words haunted him, too. Only he and Will had heard what the Oracle had prophesied a few weeks ago, and Nico hadn't shared it with anyone else. Yet, not even the other counselors. Why should he? He hadn't warned of any doomsday threats to Camp Half-Blood. The world was, as far as he knew, safe from now from any angry gods or rebellious titans. Resurrected maniacal Roman emperors were no longer a thing to worry about. I want this to be like a small story in a world of, like, apocalypses. What I mean is, I don't want Nico and Will to have to save the world, because then it would be very repetitive, and would you really believe that each summer one of them has to save the world? I just want them to have to save Bob and not have, like, the fate of the world resting on their shoulders while they do it. The prophecy merely concerned that lone voice in his dreams, begging for help, specifically Nico's help. Some of the satyrs collected your things, said Chiron, as the 4 demigods joined him on the road. They wish you well in your journey. We might need it, Kayla grumbled. Chiron, just tell us the truth. The Grey Sisters aren't going to kill us, are they? That was my second option for this trip. I thought so. What? No, he looked aghast. At least they haven't killed anyone so far. You and Nico, cried Austin, throwing up his hands. Both of you think that's an acceptable thing to tell us? Chiron's smile lines crinkled around his eyes. Now, you're demigods. You'll be fine. I tried tipping them a few extra drachmas at the start of the trip, though. I've heard that helps make the experience less intense. He fished in the pocket of his archery vest, pulling out a golden coin. Is this a typo? I read golden coin, but it says golden cold. Do you think this is in the printed books? I am gonna have to check when I get my copy. He pulled out a golden cold and threw it in the road. Stop, O chariot of damnation. It makes sense that they're using this again because they used it, obviously, in Sea of Monsters. And even though they've traveled many a time, they've never used it again, which was like convenience of the plot and also sprinkling in some Greek mythology, but it's nice that it's not a one-time thing. No sooner had Chiron finished speaking that the taxi arrived. It did not putter or cruise up to the group. It appeared. The coin sank into the pavement, tendrils of dark smoke curled upward, the asphalt twisted, and the Grey Sisters' taxi erupted into being. It looked like a taxi, all right, but its edges swirled and wafted if you stared at it too long. Nico had heard all about Perseus, Max, and Apollo's experiences with a particular mode of transportation. I forgot that was a thing. So never mind my small rant of it disappearing once in the Sea of Monsters. It apparently appeared in Trials of Apollo. Good to remember that. They repeatedly told him that they even preferred his shadow travel to the bumpy, vomit-inducing nightmare that was riding in that car. The Grey Sisters had a long history of detesting heroes, and at this point they viewed every inhabitant of Camp Half-Blood as a potential hero to be detested. Nico didn't want to admit it to the others, but he had met the sisters several times on his own, and he kind of liked them. They were thorny, difficult, stuck in their ways, chaotic, yet weirdly dependable. They wore their darkness on their sleeves. For Stick's sake, they all shared a single eye. How could Nico not appreciate them? The sisters were in the midst of an argument as one of the rear doors swung open. I know exactly what I'm doing, Wasp, said the old lady sitting shotgun, her stringy gray hair swaying over her face. When have I ever not known what I'm doing? Oh, screeched Wasp, who sat up front in the middle. That's lush. That's a real lush opinion, Tempest. Do you even know what lush means? Tempest shot back. The driver groaned dramatically. Are you two children? Will you please stop talking? Tempest drew her hands up and put on her best imitation of the driver, which confused Nico since they all sounded identical. Oh, my name is Anger, and I'm so mature. I will eat the eye, warmed Anger. I'll do it. You wouldn't, said Wasp. With salt and pepper and a little paprika, Unger threatened. I'll do it. Hi, said Austin, hoisting his saxophone case. Is there any way you could pop the trunk? We have some luggage. All three Grey sisters spun toward Austin and spoke in unison. No! Then they fell back into arguing. Nico decided right then and there that these were his favorite people in the whole world. Still, he sympathized with Kyla and Austin as Chiron worked to open the trunk. Both demigods looked more frightened than they ever had in the last year. You sure you don't want me to shadow travel you to Manhattan? Nico offered. Will sighed. Nico, you can't use shadow travel like public transportation. It'll drain you dry. It's okay, Nico, Kyla said, sounding like she was trying hard to believe it. We'll be fine. Plus, we're going to different places, said Austin. My mom's meeting me uptown. I actually got into an academy up in Harlem, and she found an apartment for us close by. Sounds like a good place to end up, said Will. Not too far from here. And there's so much history in Harlem to explore, added Austin. Apparently, one of the clubs where Miles Davis used to play has reopened. Nico nodded half-heartedly. He tried to remember who Miles Davis was. Had he scored the soundtrack for Star Wars? Obviously, all the things he knows about pop culture would flow from Will, so it's just very Star Wars-centric. What about you, Kayla? Said Chiron, loading her archery gear into the trunk. Back to Toronto, she said. Dad wanted me to come home. And it's actually been a while. I'm pretty excited, to be honest. Her eyes glinted, especially to prove that I'm now better than him at archery. Austin turned to Nico and Will. So, you two are really staying here? Nico hoped Will would answer first. The sun falling behind the western hills made Will's curly blonde hair look like it was aflame. For a moment, Nico wondered if Will was using his glow-in-the-dark power. Either way, it made Nico a little annoyed. Why did Will have to be so beautiful all the time? This throwback to Percy describing Annabeth. Every time he looks at her, he's like, she's so beautiful. Sweat glistened on her brow, but she just glistened and was so beautiful when she was running for her life. It's nice to see the parallels between the dark-haired boy and the golden-haired partner. Let's stop here for a moment, because before, while they were walking through camp, they were like, oh, the only cabins inhabited were the Apollo cabin, obviously these three people, and Nico and Hades' cabin, because everyone left because of summer. But before, there were people throughout the whole year, like Will and Annabeth and Clarice and some other campers. So are no campers staying behind after summer this year? What is going on? Why is it empty? Why is Nico staying at Camp Half-Blood weird? Does he have a house? Where would he go besides Camp Jupiter? I think we are, said Will, taking Nico's hand. Mom's touring for a new album this fall, and I don't know if I want to bounce around the country in the back of a van. Could be fun, said Austin. I hope I get to travel because of my music one day. Kayla nodded. I wonder what it would be like to see other places without worrying whether some murderous statue is going to kill you. Honestly, just convert to Christianity. That's what you need to do. Weird reference, watch the video. Oh, come on, said Nico. Where's the fun in that? Are you going to get in the car? Tempest growled. Or are you paying us to listen to your boring conversation? She was hanging out the window with an open palm extended toward them. Austin paid her with 3 drachmas, tipping her heavily as Chiron had suggested. Tempest examined the coins for a moment. Nico didn't know how, as she had no eyes behind that thick gray curtain of hair, then gruntled. She pulled herself back into the car. Get in, she said. There were quick hugs and cheek kisses, and then Austin and Kayla climbed into the backseat of the Grey sisters' taxi. All the while, the sisters continued to argue. Kayla looked around the cab. We've been on worse adventures, she said to those outside the car. Have we? Asked Austin. Anyway, hope to see you soon, said Kayla, and don't get into any trouble, you two. Oh, you got a big storm coming, honey. Austin leaned across Kayla to poke his head out the window, a mischievous excitement on his face. But if there is trouble, Will waved at them. You'll know, promise. Be safe yourselves, Chiron called out. Drive, anger, drive, screamed Wasp. Isn't that what you do? Honestly, why do you even sit in that seat if you don't? Her words were lost as the taxi jerked forward and disappeared in a blur of gray. This video is going to be 100 hours long. Stay with me. Yep, Nico loved the sisters. So that's it, said Will. They were the last, weren't they? Indeed, said Chiron. Aside from some of the staff, the satyrs, and the dryads, Camp Half-Blood is actually empty. The old centaurs sounded a bit lost. As far as Nico could recall since he'd started coming here, this was the first time that there were no demigods present, aside from him and Will, that is. Okay, explain. This is weird, said Nico. Really weird. A lot has happened over the past few years, said Chiron wistfully. I understand more than ever why campers would want to go home to be with their families, or to see the world. I guess, said Nico. Now, gentlemen, said Chiron, dusting off the front of his vest, I've got a meeting with Juniper and the Dryads about tree rot. Exciting stuff, I assure you. I'll see you at dinner. They nodded, then waved as Chiron galloped off. If Nico didn't have Will's doctor's note, would he still have to sit on his own table and then Will separately on his own? That would be so sad. So, said Nico, what do we do next? Will, still holding Nico's hand, guided him back up to the hill. Well, we don't have any monsters to slay. Boo. I could raise a skeleton army to perform a choreographed dance. I bet I could teach them. Single ladies, if you like. Nico knows the dance to single ladies. Damn it, no, this is something I have to see. Will chuckled. We don't have any Roman emperors to locate and dethrone either. Nico flinched. Ugh, don't remind me. If I could go the rest of my life without ever thinking Nero's name again, I'd be happy. That's a funny joke, said Will as they reached the summit. What is? You, said Will, being happy. What? Nico rolled his eyes. My grumpy little ball of darkness, added Will, poking him in the ribs. Ew, gross, Nico said, dancing away from him. We're not making that a thing. Did you already forget that I was once your, and I'm quoting you here, Nico, significant annoyance? Ah, the growth they've been through. Oh, you're still that, said Nico, and then Will was chasing him down the hill, back into camp. In that moment, Nico allowed himself to enjoy the sensation. Will was right. There were no threats whatsoever on the horizon. No big bats, no lurking demigod traitors, no hitting monsters waiting to destroy Camp Half-Blood. And still. But then dread prickled across Nico's skin. His body was warning him, wasn't it? Don't get too comfortable. It was telling him. He's waiting for you in Tartarus. Or have you forgotten about him like everyone else did? Poor Percy. I bet he hasn't forgotten. He hasn't. I want to see Percy and Nico interact. The last time I remember was obviously the "you're not my type," but they probably interacted. Did they get to interact in Trials of Apollo? Let me know down below. Maybe this period of rest wasn't such a good thing. If Nico didn't have some terrible monster or villain to fight, then what excuse did he have to ignore the voice any longer? The truth was, he couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. He'd been visited by so many ghosts over the years. The dead wanted to be heard, and who better to listen to them than a son of Hades? A daughter of Pluto, maybe. But this voice, it did not belong to someone who had passed on, and Nico had never heard someone sound as desperate for help. So his mood was muted by the time he and Will made it to the dining pavilion after stopping by their cabins to freshen up first. It felt strange to be in this place that was normally so alive. Now, there were only a few staffed dryads and harpies spread unevenly across the various tables. The camp director, Dionysus, Mr. D to all of them, was lounging at the head table with Chiron, who had somehow beaten them to dinner. The two administrators were so deep in conversation that they barely acknowledged Will when he waved. Will is so cute! Even the satyrs who served Nico and Will didn't seem all that thrilled to be doing so. This whole place feels like my soul, Nico joked to Will. You know, empty and dark. Will swallowed down some chicken kebabs. You're not empty, he said, then pointed the skewer at Nico. You're definitely dark, though. Dark as the pits of the underworld. Will looked down, focusing on his food like it was the most interesting thing he'd seen. We don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, said Nico. Will managed to smile. His warmth was genuine, like it always was, since he was basically a literal rain of sunshine. I need Will to win Magnus Chase. I need it. And Nico to make Alex name two more iconic pairs meeting together. Please. You can't. It's impossible. And it softened Nico just a bit. We can, he said, but maybe not now, Nico. Austin and Kayla just left. The camp is calm, serene, quiet. Let's just appreciate the break, okay? Nico nodded, but he wasn't sure how he was supposed to do what Will had requested. When had he ever gotten a break before? If it wasn't dead Roman emperors, it was his father, or Minos, or his stepmother, Persephone. It had been years since the particular incident had happened, but he was still annoyed about being turned into a dandelion. A dandelion. It was an affront to his aesthetic. I love that that's the part that he hated the most about that. And there were other things he didn't want to remember. Darker things. Ghosts that would probably visit him eventually. Nico stuffed it all down. Is he? Spoilers to Trials of Apollo. Obviously, if you're watching this, you've read that. Is he referring to Jason's death? Are we gonna get a Jason appearance in this book? I hope so. I want to cry. Nico stuffed it all down, making a grumpy little ball of darkness inside his chest. Then he forced a smile as he listened to Will talk about all the things they could do That fall while they stayed at camp, it would be fine. Everything would be fine. Famous last words. Chapter 2. God, this really is going to be a long-ass video. It always came rushing back to Nico in his dreams. When he'd first confessed to Will that he was hearing a particularly haunted voice from the underworld, Nico worried he shouldn't have said anything. Sometimes, Will didn't seem to understand what it meant for Nico to be, well, Nico. The underworld spooked Will, to be frank, but Nico needed to tell someone what was happening to him. Months earlier, Nico had sensed his friend Jason Grace's death, which had sent him into a tailspin of grief and rage. By the time Lester and Meg had arrived at Camp Half-Blood at the start of the summer, Nico's emotions were so volatile that he'd braced the dead more than once by accident. There is nothing more disconcerting than waking in the morning and finding a freshly incarnated zombie standing over you, ready to take your breakfast order. At least they weren't aggressive. Will had listened to him attentively, like he always did. Then he'd posed a few questions, mostly about whether the voice had anything to do with the flashback Nico had also been having lately. Will had stayed quiet for a while and then asked, "Are you sure it's not post-traumatic stress disorder?" Sometimes Nico's brain thought of a joke, and it came out of his mouth a second later without any sort of filter at all. That's exactly what happened when he blurted out, "My whole life is a disorder." Will hadn't laughed at that. Obviously, poor Will. Obviously, poor Nico as well, but it hurts seeing someone you love behave like that and think like that about themselves and go through that. Instead, he suggested that maybe Nico should talk to Mr. D. For all of Dionysus' fault, he was an Olympian god with experience in these matters, dreams, visions, and altered states of consciousness. He's also the god of madness, Nico thought. He tried not to dwell on that, or the implications of Will making such a suggestion. "I'd rather do anything else," Nico countered. Can the guy even make it through a single conversation without sarcasm, an insult, or a combination of both? Will grinned. "Can you?" Shots fired, Will Solace. Love to see it. Nico had spent the rest of the day trying to recover from Will murdering him with those two words. This right here. Clearly, this is Mark Oshero's influence. You can tell if you've ever read Rick Riordan. You can tell. Without even having read Mark Oshero, you can tell that this is not Rick Riordan's input. And I loved it. I am loving the writing. I am loving everything. God, my expectations were like here and now they're through the roof. Still, there was some truth to what Will had said. This wasn't the first time Nico had dealt with flashbacks or PTSD. He remembered coaching Hazel Levesque through her own devastating flashbacks after she'd spent time in the underworld. He'd even had a frank conversation with Reina Adela Ramirez Arellano about post-traumatic stress and how it related to the memories of her father. Yet, he never really turned the gaze inward. The gaze. Was he dealing with the same kind of thing? Honestly, how could he not be? But he was sure the voice was something else. After dinner on the day he'd confided to Will, Nico got up the nerve to speak with Mr. D. He told the director about his flashbacks during the day, the repetitive dreams, the voice from deep within Tartarus. He did not, however, tell Mr. D the details of the oracle's prophecy. That still felt too raw, too personal for a first conversation. Mr. D sat back in his desk chair, turning his can of Diet Coke in his fingers. With his unkempt black hair, his blotchy complexion, and his wrinkled leopard-patterned camp shirt, Dionysus looked more like a hungover Vegas conventioner than a god. To Nico's surprise, Mr. D did not tell him to go away, or make any snarty comment at Nico's expense. "We need to get to the bottom of this." Mr. D's violet eyes were unsettling, like crystallized wine, or blood. "I want to see you each morning at breakfast. You are to report on your dreams and keep me apprised if anything new comes up." The ball of darkness in Nico's chest pressed against his stomach. He would have preferred Mr. D being dismissive and rude. Seeing the god was serious was disturbing. "Every day?" he asked. "Are you sure that's necessary?" "Believe me, Nico Di Angelo, I'd rather not have my breakfast spoiled with your silly mortal problems, but yes, it is necessary if you'd like to keep your consciousness intact. And try to have some interesting dreams, will you? Not the usual boring, I was flying, I was being chased, I was singing on stage in my underwear tripe." So it had become a routine. Mr. D talked to Nico each morning, the god's plate piled high with sausage and eggs, while Nico was usually empty except for a few strawberries. That too concerned Mr. D, who, as the god of festivity, disapproved of anyone not enjoying food. "I know you've got the whole gaunt and pale son of Hades thing going on, but you're still human. You need to eat." "Agreed." Nico shrugged. "I guess I'm used to being hungry. It doesn't really bother me." Mr. D grunted. But your appetite is getting worse, along with the flashback and the voice in your dreams. It's nothing I can't handle, Nico insisted. Mr. D pushed his plate away. He turned his whole body toward Nico. Look here, boy. After living in exile at Camp Half-Blood all these wretched years, I've learned that you mortals are surprisingly resilient. Exactly, Nico began. Mr. D held up a hand. I'm not done. You may be resilient, but you're still human. There's no need to punish yourself with hunger just because it's what you're used to. For your mind to heal, your body must also. Yeah. Nico grumbled, then his stomach followed with another grumbling of its own. Some days, Nico couldn't share his dreams with Mr. D. They were too painful, too vicious, dredging up old memories he didn't want to examine. But other times, Nico had to admit that talking helped. He found that he didn't have to sugarcoat anything with Dionysus. The same crudeness he'd found annoying in the camp director was actually really helpful when Nico was recounting his flashbacks. My goodness, Mr. D once said after Nico described a state of dreams that had less to do with singing in his underwear and more to do with simultaneously being burned, drowned, and crushed under a giant bronze vase filled with ants. That's marvelous. I must remember to give my worst enemies that nightmare. But none of these talks got to the heart of the matter. Why were these visions happening to Nico? Did he deserve them? Probably not, but let's move on to chapter 3. Still not halfway there. Jesus. Also a reference to that fanfic. On the night after Kayla and Austin left, Nico stayed awake long after Will had retired to Apollo's cabin. I want a little bit of a Persebath moment in the stables of our go-to, but that's fine. I don't need to see them cuddling yet. His mind was still buzzing, and he was dreading sleep. Demigods always had vivid and occasionally prophetic dreams, but when he slept, the voice became almost unbearable. Help me, please, it called out. I need you, Nico Di Angelo. I need you. Well, so did every ghost who visited him. The dead just wanted to be heard, especially if they hadn't been listened to during their time on Earth. The underworld was full of souls wandering the fields of Asphodel, crying out for attention. But this voice wasn't dead. It felt further away than even Asphodel, and more tortured than any ghost. This voice was calling out from Tartarus, the darkest and deepest area of the underworld, and nobody called out from Tartarus. It had to be Bob the Titan. I'm just gonna say it right now, I don't think it is. I think it's either one of two things. It's someone pretending to be Bob the Titan to lure Nico into Tartarus, or it's someone completely different. I do think that we're gonna get Bob the Titan as a character, but I don't think he's the voice. Nico remembered their first meeting, Christmas Day nearly 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Trying to picture the timeline. I'm just gonna say he's 16. I don't care to do the math because it's impossible math. When Nico, Percy Jackson, and Thalia Grace were tasked by Persephone to retrieve Hades' missing sword. To do so, they had to battle Iapetus, a titan unleashed from the depths of Tartarus. The titan might have killed all three of them, but with the last of his strength, Percy had pulled the Iapetus into the river Lethe, wiping him of all his memories. Then Percy renamed him Bob and convinced the titan they were good friends. Strangely, the new identity stuck. Nico had visited Bob several times since then down in the underworld. The newly gentle titan had taken a janitorial job in Hades' palace and seemed quite happy to spend his life sweeping up bones and dusting sarcophagi. He and Nico struck up a strange friendship. Both felt disconnected from their past and comfortable around others and melancholy about their mutual friend, Percy Jackson, who never seemed to remember they existed. Jeez, poor Nico. And also poor Percy. He had his reasons. He was going through a lot. And Percy always felt guilty. I am a Percy apologist, and I don't apologize about it. Then, a year and a half ago, Percy and Annabeth had fallen into Tartarus. Bob had sensed their peril and plunged into the abyss to help them. He had held up an army of monsters to give Percy and Annabeth a chance to return to the mortal world. No one was sure what happened to Bob after that, whether he had died or somehow survived. See, that is why I included Bob in my top 10 saddest deaths of the Percy Jackson verse. Go check that video out. No one was sure. It was like Jet in Avatar. Is he truly dead? You know, it's very unclear. But almost every day for the last 3 years, Nico had thought about Bob. He felt guilty. They should have saved him. Someone should have rescued him from Tartarus. How could they just have left him there after he'd saved Percy and Annabeth? And, well, pretty much the entire world. Maybe Will and Mr. D were right. Maybe Bob's voice was a false echo, a manifestation of Nico's own PTSD. But that didn't explain the prophecy. That's what Nico was thinking about when sleep finally came to him. I just want to hear this prophecy. Please, someone tell it to me. Nico was in darkness. What else was new? He'd had this dream so many times he thought he knew where it was leading, except not this time. In the void, Nico heard his name. Nico. A different voice than before, but so familiar. Caro Nicolo. Is this going to be his mother or his sister? He stared as shadows wrapped around him. No one ever called him Nicolo. No one except Nicolo, vita mia. The shadows pressed together against his face. He couldn't breathe. He hadn't heard that voice in years. Decades. Mama? I'm here, he tried to call out. Please don't go. Vita mia, she repeated. Devi ascoltarmi. Nico struggled to understand what she was saying. He was Italian, yes, this was his native language, but his mind moved sluggishly, as if the darkness had seeped into his skull. Finally, the translation came to him. I am listening, Mama, he answered. He thrashed, trying to free himself from the thick cocoon of shadows. Ascolta, the voice cried. Listen, Nico fell. He plunged into a soft, warm nest of blankets. Was he back at his bunk at camp? He sat up and light. On a lacquered brown nightstand, an ugly steel desk lamp, and cast a yellow glow over an oddly familiar room. Thick blackout curtains, a flat-screen TV, stripped golden cream wallpaper like gilded prison... Is he at the Lotus Hotel? Prison bars. Wait, no, was this? He grabbed a laminated card from the nightstand. Lotus Hotel and Casino. In-room breakfast option. I knew it. No. He turned slowly in a gigantic king-size bed. Remember how this mattress made hollow tiny creaks whenever he moved. He sensed her before he saw her, asleep in the bed next to him. I do love that we're getting to see Nico in the Lotus Hotel, because even though that's a big part of his character, it's never been explored besides the fact that he was in a limbo and now he wasn't, and he was also a child of the big three. We've never really explored it, and now we're going to, so let's go. He sensed her before he saw her, asleep in the bed next to him. His sister Bianca. She looked so peaceful there, her chest rising slowly with her breath. Her dark hair fanned across her pillow. Nico tried to open his mouth, tried to call to her, but his voice didn't work. There was something poking out from the edge of the duvet as Bianca shouldered. Was that her quiver? Nico ripped back the covers and saw that this sister was dressed as if all ready for battle, complete with boots, jacket, and arrows. That was all wrong. Bianca hadn't become a hunter of Artemis until after the time in the Lotus Casino. Then she'd taken the pledge and left Nico for the last time. If he could just warn her, keep her from making those choices. Wake up, he tried to yell, but his lips couldn't open. His right hand flew up to his mouth, fear curdled in his stomach. He bolted out of bed, tripping as a duvet tangled his legs, and then staggered into the harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom. He braced his hands on the makeup mirror. Once his eyes adjusted, Nico wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He literally had no mouth. Beneath his nose, where his lips had been, was a pale line of scar tissue, very much like Deadpool in the Wolverine movie. Hate to see it. This is a dream, he told himself. A dream. Wake up, wake up, wake up. His terrified, marred reflection continued to stare back at him. For the 1,000th time, Nico wished he had inherited Hades' dream magic. Then he could control what he saw. He would already be awake. He would tell Nick and Mr. D about his nightmares, downplaying their importance, and go back to being in denial about the voice from Tartarus. That would be much easier. Instead, he stumbled back into the room. The bed was now empty. Bianca, where did you go? But he couldn't yell it. He couldn't see anything. Nico took another step toward the bed and plunged through the floor. Again, he fell. This is stressful. This time when he landed, he smacked against something very solid. The air rushed out of his lungs, and he opened his eyes to find himself looking at sky. Bright blue sky, framed by rows of steel suspension cables. Oh, this better not have to do with Jason or Percy. Let's see. What? He thought. Where am I? His hands pushed against the surface beneath him. It was warm and stretchy. Asphalt. A road. Then he saw the cars on either side of him. Nico scrambled to his feet in a panic, certain he was about to be run over. But the cars remained still. He hesitantly approached one and was further confused to discover the driver's seat was empty. All the cars seemed deserted. 2,000 lines of traffic, and in the distance, the Manhattan scale line. The wind buffeted with Nico's clothes. The asphalt swayed gently, while above him, the graph blue metal support cables thrummed like giant guitar strings. Pedestrian paths on either side of the road were blocked off with dull red barriers. But there were no people anyway. Far below, the East River rippled with sunlight. Okay, dream, he muttered to himself. Why am I on the New York City Bridge? As soon as he said it, Nico had two realizations. First, he could talk again. His mouth was no longer fused shut. Second, this was the Williamsburg Bridge. Oh no, he thought. No, I won't relive this day. Oh man, try not to spoil myself. You know when you think something's gonna happen so your eyes fly down to the bottom of the page and you spoil yourself? Damn it, I just did that. because I was like, what is he talking about? I don't remember this day. But now I do, so let's keep reading. There was a road behind Nico and his blood ran cold. He turned and saw the impossible. The figure was tall and golden, but not in an attractive way like Will, were in an unnatural, terrifying, I'm going to kill you sort of way. He stood 9 feet tall, with a cruel, ageless face, molten gold eyes, and shining armor. In his hands gleamed an enormous scythe, Kronos. This doesn't make sense, Nico edged back, his pulse racing as the Titans strode toward him, a horde of monsters and allied demigods at his back. Dreams rarely made sense, but this one, Nico hadn't even been on the Williamsburg Bridge during the Battle of Manhattan. He'd only heard how Percy had collapsed the center of the bridge to keep Kronos' invention at bay. Kronos locked his eyes on Nico. The Titan smiled, hideous, as if he could read Nico's thoughts. He raised his scythe. No, Nico turned to run towards Manhattan, away from Kronos' advancing army, but they stood in his way. Percy, Michael Yu, Annabeth, Will, looking so much younger and so terrified. Nico froze, trapped between the lines of battle. The bridge swayed beneath him. This isn't real, Nico told himself. I'm not here. Listen, Percy stepped forward, forcing Nico back in Kronos' direction. Percy, what is this? Nico held up his hands defensively. What are you doing? You have to listen, said Michael Yu. His intense brown eyes brimmed with tears. If you don't, you will share my fate. Ominous much? Nico snarled. He spun around, but Kronos was nearly on top of him, wielding the scythe like a guillotine blade. Listen, commanded the Titan. I am! Nico was furious. Whoever is trying to reach me, just tell me what you want. Kronos' scythe hurtled toward his face. Nico was in darkness. Again. What a sequence! To say I'm having fun reading this while being stressed and on edge, but still enjoying it is an understatement. I'm loving what we're getting so far. By this point, he was just irritated. A person could only take so much terror and misery before it started to get really annoying. This weird dream jumping through memories and events seemed so unnecessary. I get the message, he thought. I will listen. Isn't that good enough? A light appeared, soft and purple. What the... Nico grabbed his Stygian sword and let its glow illuminate his surroundings. He was etched into an X-shaped space, barely large enough to hold him. The gleaming metallic walls were cool to the touch. In front of him, etched into the bronze, were 3 long hash marks. Is this when he is in the bottle, being taken, in the jar by the giants? Oh no. No, he said aloud, and the sound of his own voice echoed back to him. You've got to be kidding me. Nico's dream had taken him back to the jar that the giants, Ephiades and Otis, had stuffed him in so he could serve as bait for the 7 demigods of the prophecy. It was, all things considered, not exactly Nico's favorite memory. Here, Nico called out, why are you making me relive this? He shut his eyes and smacked the side of his head. Wake up, Nico, wake up! He opened his eyes again. He was still in the jar, and there at his feet was 1 lone pomegranate seed. His stomach contracted. Panic swelled in his throat. He remembered the endless hours in the jar, racked with hunger and thirst, wondering how long he could hold out before eating that pomegranate seed. His last bit of sustenance. Hey, subconscious, said Nico, you're trying to get me to realize something. This is a terrible way to go about it. He was met with silence. Suddenly, Jesus, my eyes just jumped to the bottom of the page again. Suddenly, a terrible screeching sound filled the vessel as the lid was pried open. Harsh light spilled in. Nico winced and covered his eyes. This hadn't happened in the real world. The jar hadn't been opened until it tripped over just before the fight with Ephialtes and Otis. Nico tried to uncover his eyes, but the light above was still too bright. Given the strange logic of his dream ride, he couldn't have been surprised if Cookie Monster appeared over the mouth of the jar, reached inside, and gobbled up Nico like the chocolate chip cookie he was. Cookie Monster did not in fact show up. Percy Jackson! I knew it was coming, but it still makes me happy. Nico gazed up into Percy's face, which was framed by tousled black hair. His green eyes looked stormy, his mouth twisted down in concern. There was a time when just the thought of Percy had made Nico feel an intense pit of desire in his gut. Same. We've all been there. It was an unrequited desire, of course, because Percy was never going to have the same feelings for Nico. It had torn up Nico for a long, long time. After a while, though, he became used to the idea that he wanted things he couldn't have. Percy, Bianca, his mother, stability. It was all the same. Getting over Percy was easier than Nico expected. What was one straight boy when you spend your whole life longing for others? another line that Rick Riordan on his own can never dream of writing. Mark Oshiro, we thank you for your service. As bizarre as this dream was, the sight of Percy was comforting to Nico. He missed his friend and was eager to get out of this stupid jar. He remembered how frail and sickly he'd been when Piper had rescued him in real life. This time felt just as difficult. He tried to untangle his stiff legs and stand so Percy could help pull him out. The other demigods must have defeated Otis and Ephialtes already. Nico couldn't hear anything outside the confines of his bronze prison. Nico reached up to take Percy's hand, but Percy was now further away. Even standing with his arms outstretched, Nico couldn't reach the mouth of the jar. Nico looked down and his heart leaped into his throat. Either that pomegranate seed had swollen to the size of an apple, or Nico was shrinking. Oh no, he's like Alice in Wonderland. He cast another glance at Percy. No, his friend was even further away. The mouth of the jar now seemed like a skylight at the top of a cathedral's dome, and Percy was the size of the Titan, peeking in to see what the little mortals were up to. I don't like that. Percy reached in with his gigantic hand. Nico leaped up, desperate to grab hold of one of Percy's fingers, but he just kept shrinking smaller and smaller, the walls of the jar looming around him. "Stop it!" Nico cried out. Percy pulled the hand out of the jar. His face disappeared for a few seconds. When it returned, his eyes were red and glassy. He was crying. "No, what is happening?" "Nico," he said. "Nico, listen." Nico wanted to scream. "I have literally been doing nothing else." His voice came out tiny and high-pitched, like he'd sucked down the helium from a million balloons. It only sounded worse as it echoed through the jar. "You have to go," Percy said. Nico's heart seemed to be shrinking at a slower rate than his ribcage. It pressed against his sternum, hammering with each beat. "Go where?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "You made a mistake," said Percy. "You have to fix it." The jar shattered again. Nico fell. Please let the boy wake up. Chapter 4. Nico slammed hard into a stone column. Then he stumbled to the ground, breathless, and grasped for his blade, but it wasn't there. He groaned, and the sound reverberated in a long, haunting echo. His skin felt sticky and damp. Was that sweat? Blood? He decided he didn't want to know. Okay, so we've gotten Percy, we've gotten Bianca. Now we just need Jason and maybe Will later on. His eyes adjusted to the low light. He saw a smoke-stained ceiling overhead, barrel arches stretching between rows of limestone columns. He rolled to his feet. Bright bands of sunlight filtered through a row of high-set barred windows, making stripes of shadow across the foot. It was the image that triggered Nico's memory and revealed where he was. Nico had never dreamed about this before. In fact, he'd done everything in his power to avoid thinking about that day ever again. He slowly pushed himself to his feet. "Brain, if you're doing this, this is the worst mental vacation of all time," he said bitterly. "Nothing. If this is a god or a demigod or something else," Nico added, "you're really starting to annoy me." Still no response. So here he was, back in the basement of that church whose name he did not remember, looking for, the scepter of Diocletian. Except someone else had been there with him. Oh, Jason Grace. A new pit opened in Nico's stomach. Most of the time, emptiness was his best friend, but there was a vacancy in his heart that had never been filled since Jason. Ever since Nico gulped. Even in this ridiculous dream, Jason was gone. Nico wiped a tear from his cheek. "Okay, this has to stop. Please just wake me up." "You still think this is a dream?" Nico spun toward the voice. "Who's there?" "Come now, Nico Di Angelo. Don't you remember?" "This is very confusing." He inched forward until the voice's source came into view. A marble bust of Diocletian sitting atop its pedestal, staring right at Nico. The emperor's head was still on his shoulders, not sign of it ever having been broken, which made sense in the weird logic of this dream. Without Jason here to smash it, the bust would still be in one piece. Nico's memories of this day poured over him, a waterfall of images and sensations that he had kept locked deep in his mind. One of them rose to the surface. Jason, grabbing Nico and lifting him in the air while they chased down Fabionis, the strange winged man who had been buying an ice cream cone in Dalmatia. Things had seemed so much simpler then. When you saw a wind god buying ice cream, you chased him. When anyone tried to touch you, you lashed out. Nico had always hated being touched. As soon as Jason set him down that day, Nico had barked, "Don't grab me again." Now, staring at that unnerving bust of Diocletian, Nico wished for nothing more than to feel Jason's great protecting arms around him, but Jason wasn't here. Behind Nico, a different voice said, "Are you ready?" Nico spun once more, and there, leaning against one of the columns, stood Fabius, the Roman god of the west wind. He was dressed exactly as he had been that day, a red tank top over an aggravatingly bright set of Bermuda shorts and huarache sandals? I don't know what that is. You, Nico snarled. Get out of my dreams. Oh, Nico, said Fabianus, shaking his head. If only it were that easy. Nothing is easy for me, he said. I've come to expect that. Then you know I have to take you to see someone. There was no joy in the god's face, none of the excitement or eagerness that Nico had seen last summer. Fabianus looked scared. Please no, Nico began. You have to fix it, Nico. Nico's heart hammered even harder against his ribs. What came next in the real world had been, well, truly one of the worst things Nico had ever been through, which was saying a lot for him. He'd had to endure Cupid, who was no adorable little winged cherub. The intense, intimidating god of desire had forced Nico to confess his crush on Percy Jackson in front of Jason, all so they could acquire the scepter. The ordeal had proved vital to winning the war against Gaia. It had also turned a wound in Nico that still hadn't healed. That was not cool, Cupid. Iconic moment, I'll give you that, but not cool at all. Whatever this is, Nico said, I got the message. I need to listen. I am listening, so I don't need to get through this again. You have to talk to him, said Fabianus, but not for the reason you think. Nico tried to steady his breathing. He forced himself to say, will Jason be there? He wasn't sure which answer would be more painful, yes or no. The god's expression darkened. No, Nico. He's gone. Then he added softly, almost to himself, they'll all be gone eventually. Do you think Jason was reincarnated to get into like the very, very good place in Elysium? Without another word, Favonius dissolved into a swirl of dust and sunlight. The wind wrapped around Nico and lifted him off the floor. Even in a dream, Nico hated the sensation, like his entire body was being torn to atoms. They sipped through the smallest crack of the church window, then rest across the Croatian countryside without regard for gravity or mass or his stomach. All Nico's thoughts and feelings collided with one another, vying to exist simultaneously in his mind. He had literally falling apart into a mess of emotions. At least I am #on brand in my dreams, he thought. Then Will would hate that joke. Another thing that was like clearly Mark Oshiro. I can't even imagine Rick knowing what #on brand means. The wind deposited him on a hill overlooking the ruins of Salona. But put back together again, Nico's thin body trembled with nausea. He felt like he had Sisyphus in his throat, eternally pushing his stone up the steep incline. Ugh, he coughed. That feeling is just as bad in a dream. Favonia's disembodied laughter floated around him. Look at you, still thinking this is a dream. You're so cute when you're delusional, Nico Di Angelo. Nico really, really hated being called cute. He had no time for retorts, though. The wind faded and Favonius was gone. Nico scanned the ruins. They looked exactly as they had before, crumbling, decaying shells of buildings, moss-covered lines of stone, a once great Roman city reduced to a field of rocks. Nico still wasn't impressed. He'd seen too many ruins just like these over the years, reminders of how quickly mortal creation could turn to rubble. He raised his hands. Let's get on with it then. Cupid, I'm here. Nico waited, but there was nothing. No booming Russian voice taunting him, coercing him to reveal his most painful secret. And suddenly, Cupid's voice was everywhere. You know what you need to do. The words whisked past Nico's ear. Nico tried to act unfazed. It was just a dream about a god who had left Nico wounded, shattered, and exposed, but still a dream. This time, he would not be Cupid's chew toy. He crossed his arms. I get it, he said. I don't need convincing anymore. I'll go to Tartarus. It's not enough, Nico Di Angelo. Look upon me. Look upon you? But I thought no one could see you in your true form. Unseen, Cupid slammed into him, hurling Nico backwards into a broken column. Look upon me. Cupid was now so close that Nico could feel the breath on his face. I can't see you, Nico screamed. Stop with these games. I am here. The voice came from behind him now, and all the hair stood up on Nico's arm. It was an instantaneous reaction, a fear so primal that without even thinking it, without issuing the command, Nico called forth skeletons. They rose from the earth beneath his feet, moss and dirt and decay hanging out from their bones. They ringed Nico, their stick-like arms and defensive postures ready to fight for him. Turn around, Nico. Look upon me. The voice had shifted direction again. Nico did not want to look. He had no rational reason to believe this, but he was convinced that if he actually did see Cupid, he would die. Please, Nico, look at me. The voice had changed. It was warm, like honey, like a late summer sunset, like the first rush of feet from a campfire. It was Cupid. No, it was love. Nico turned slowly, and there stood Will Sellers. I knew it, but I'm still happy to see it confirmed. His golden hair lit oh so perfectly in the dreamlike daylight of Salona. He wore the red smiling sun t-shirt that Nico had bought him as a joke, and that pair of camouflage shorts with the frayed hems. He strode barefoot over to Nico. Deep inside, Nico suspected that this was still Cupid, playing games with him, but his anger softened anyway. Will, said Nico, I don't understand. What is this? Listen, said Will, stepping closer. I've been listening. Why won't anyone tell me what I'm listening for? Will reached out and Nico did too. But just before Will's hand touched Nico, he pulled back. You have to do something, Nico, said Will, his eyes soft and sad. I know. Will shook his head. It's more than you think. When the time comes, tell me the truth. Nico laughed. There was an edge of hysteria to his voice, but laughter was the only reaction that made sense at this point. Sure, Will. Cupid? Will? Whoopid? What do I call you? Already thinking of ship names. Will's face elongated like putty, his mouth opening wider, so that Nico could see sharp, needle-like teeth lining his gums. Nico tried to back up, but the thing, whatever it was, leaped forward and screamed one last command. Wake up! That was exhausting. What a dream sequence. Nico, he opened his eyes with a jolt, but couldn't make out the figure looming over him. Nico kicked out with his right leg, unfortunately landing a foot square in his boyfriend's stomach. Obviously, who else? Who else would it be? Will howled and tumbled off the edge of the bed, then curled up on the floor of Hades' cabin. Nico, I swear, he groaned. How do you pack all the energy into your body? I'm sorry, said Nico. You scared me. Will winced as he sat upright. I think you have that backward. I could hear you screaming bloody murder from my cabin. Nico put his head in his hands. I had a bad dream. Bad dreams, plural. Really bad dreams. That's the understatement of the century. Nico felt the weight settle on the bed next to him, and he looked up to see Will there. I'm really sorry about the kick in the gut. Will smiled and warmth washed over Nico. Could I hold you? Would that be okay with you? It would be okay with me. Yes, are we getting cuddling scene? Yes. Shame burned Nico's cheeks. He didn't like Will seeing him so vulnerable, but he nodded because what he needed overrode his pride. Will pulled him close and Nico quietly cried into his boyfriend's chest. Oh. It's all right. Will ran his hand up and down Nico's back. They were just dreams. But were they? No, they've been telling you all night they weren't. Nico thought. Before he could tell Will any of the details, the door of the cabin burst open. Chiron stood there, his eyes wide. Oh no, have I interrupted something? Chiron suddenly has a voice. I'm voicing him like a different character. Nico pulled away from Will and wiped his face with the back of his hand. No, it's okay. It isn't. Just talking. Well, that's fine, said Chiron awkwardly. I'm sorry to barge in so late at night, but we have an emergency. Nico grimaced. Was it my screaming? Did I accidentally summon a battalion of skeletons while I was sleeping? What? No? Chiron hesitated. At least, I hope not. Let's revisit that in a bit. First, we have a visitor who urgently needs to speak to you. Chiron stepped aside, and Nico's heart twisted with dread as Rachel Elizabeth There, the current Oracle of Delphi, entered the cabin. Each time I read her name, my heart always twists with dread as well, Nico. She pulled back the hood of her sweatshirt and her long, gorgeous red hair spilled out. She looked flushed and exhausted, as if she'd run here all the way from Lurklin. Nico, she said, thank the gods. You have to listen. Before he could protest that he'd already received this particular message, loud and clear like a million times already tonight, dark green smoke began to pour out of Rachel's mouth. We are getting the prophecy. Finally, yeah. Chapter 5. The smoke had a bitter sulfuric smell, and Nico, Will, and Chiron all started coughing. Rachel's pupils dilated, then her eyes turned completely black as the words slithered out of her mouth in the rasping voice of the oracle. Go forth and find the one who calls out your name, who suffers and despairs from refusing to remain. There leave something of equal value behind, or your body and soul no one will ever find. Fun. So the line that I had seen before was, there leave something of equal value behind, people thinking that Will is going to be left behind in Tartarus over my dead body. but who suffers and despairs for refusing to remain? That's an interesting line, and I have no clue who it could be referring to. Rachel's knees buckled, and Will dashed forward to catch her before she hit the floor. Chiron gripped the doorframe with one hand. His face looked as pale as the gray flecks of his beard. After all these years, he said grimly, I've never gotten used to hearing those. Nico, are you all right? Nico nodded, his heart thumping. Chiron clumped into the cabin, lowering his head to fit. I know these prophecies can be hard to understand when you first hear them, he said. Take all the time you need. We don't have to discuss and dissect it now. Nico caught the sharp, chastising look that Will cast his way. Well, this is awkward, Nico muttered. Chiron tilted his head. Why? Do you know what this prophecy is about? Nico exhaled, trying to purge the last remnants of his dreams. He wondered if he could still be trapped in a nightmare. Chiron, I wanted to tell you Mr. D at some point, but, well, I just never found the right time. It's not a new prophecy, Will explained. We've already heard it. Chiron glanced at Rachel, who was now breathing more steadily in Will's arms. I'm sorry, the centaur said. Are you telling me that Miss Dare just rushed here in the middle of the night to give you a rerun prophecy? They're telling the truth, said Rachel, sounding miserable. This prophecy, it keeps coming back, again and again. Nico's heartbeat stumbled. Keeps coming back? You mean this isn't just the second time? Rachel winced, then started to cough. Will helped her sit up. I'll get you some water. Such a nice young man. He dashed to the bathroom and came back a moment later with a cup that Nico really hoped was clean. What does that mean, Nico? Rachel took it gratefully. I guess someone really needs your attention, Nico. Her expression was strained but sympathetic. The previous times, I thought maybe I was just caught in a feedback loop or something. Maybe a glitch left over from Apollo's fight with Python. I didn't want to worry you, but this time the urge overwhelmed me. I had to come find you. Will placed his hands on her shoulder. How many times has the prophecy repeated? Rachel's cheeks flushed. She took a sip of water. 12. 12 times? Said Nico. Are you serious? Chiron scowled. This is an alarming situation. In all my years, I've never heard of something like this. Rachel nodded and took another drink. It's like a constant reminder that the quest needs to be fulfilled, that it hasn't been undertaken yet. Nico frowned. So you've basically become like one of those annoying notifications in a video game reminding me to complete a side mission. She glared at him. Nico silently cursed himself. That came out wrong. I'm sorry. You're not annoying, Rachel. You know what I meant. The fun thing is, when has Nico ever played a video game? Does he mean the video game that Leo modified in Camphapla to be able to be played by demigods without, monsters rushing in to kill them? That came out wrong. I'm sorry. You're not annoying, Rachel. You know what I meant. You are annoying, Rachel. But maybe that's just me. Rachel mustered a wary smile. She nodded her thanks to Will as he helped her to her feet. This prophecy is definitely annoying. Whatever you need to do, Nico, it would be great if you could get started. And maybe I can turn off my notifications. Nico glanced at Will. It's him. There's no way it's not. Who are you talking about? Said a new voice. Mr. D stood in the doorway. He had a leopard print tank top, bright yellow board shorts, and pink flip-flops. Basically a typical outfit for the god of partying. In one arm, he was cradling a large metal mixing bowl. Nico sniffed the air. Is that popcorn? Am I, Mr. D? Have I, in my years of being in the Percy Jackson fandom, slowly transitioned into becoming Dionysus? I figured there might be a show happening out here. Mr. D tossed a kernel into his open mouth. What's a good show without popcorn? That's what I always say. Nico bit back an angry comment. Our repeating prophecy isn't exactly a show. Mr. D's eyes widened. Oh, there's a repeating prophecy. Perfect. He walked over to Nico's bed and plopped down on the foot. And here I thought it was going to be boring fall at camp. I was even thinking about staging a cage match for the Dryads. Chiron glared at the camp director. We've talked about that, Mr. D. You can participate if you like, Chiron, the god said cheerfully. I'd love to see you go hoof on fist with a few fisty mulberry bushes. Chiron sighed. Could we please focus on the problem at hand? Absolutely, Mr. D shoveled popcorn into his mouth with glee. Tell me about this repeating prophecy. Is it about me? Do I finally gain my freedom from this miserable camp and once more become the toast of the gods? Preferably with a bottle of 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild? Dionysus, please, said Chiron. I don't think this is a joking matter. I'm not sure about that, grumbled Nico, given that Rachel has more or less forced to become a prophecy voicemail system. Nico, said Will in a warning tone. Well, he isn't wrong, said Rachel. It's like all those annoying calls my dad gets about renewing his car warranties. Except, this is Bob, said Nico, finally saying the name out loud. That's who the prophecy is about. You mean the Titan Iapetus? Asked Chiron. I thought he was still in Tartarus. Tartarus, eh? Mr. D grabbed another fistful of popcorn. This is getting better by the second. Chiron ignored that. Do you think Iapetus has become a threat again? A rogue Titan would certainly be cause for concern. Bob isn't like that anymore, said Nico. He changed after his dip in the river Lethe. He's nice now, considerate. He wants to be helpful. The others regarded him in silence. The scent of their skepticism was almost as pungent as Mr. D's popcorn. Nico wanted to believe what he was saying, but doubts gnawed at him. What if Bob had died helping Percy and Annabeth? If he'd regenerated from the primordial landscape of Tartarus the way monsters did, would he be Iapetus again? That is the question every single person in the fandom is asking themselves. The prophecy had called him the one who suffers and despairs from refusing to remain. Could this be some sort of trick? Luring Nico down to the worst place in the cosmos only to help a hostile Titan escape? That is what I've been saying. If anything, it's nice to at least know that Rick and Mark are aware of all the theories that the fandom has come up with. He's my friend, he said mostly to himself. I've been hearing his voice for months, even before the prophecy. He needs my help. Or it could be a trap, suggested Mr. D, which would be very exciting. By which I mean it would be terrible, of course. Chiron frowned. Must you be so negative, Dionysus? Must you ignore the obvious, he shot back. I'm not saying it's the only explanation, but we have to consider the possibility. He turned a caramel of popcorn in his fingertips as if it might hold the answer. Nico and I have been talking about some things he's been experiencing. Dreams, waking visions, a voice calling out for him from Tartarus. Now I learned there's a repeating prophecy. I haven't even heard it yet, and I am already skeptical. I don't want to see him get hurt, Chiron. Nico felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. He'd never heard Mr. D come so close to admitting that he cared about another person. Does that mean I can share your popcorn? Nico ventured. Absolutely not. Aren't we ignoring the bigger issue? Will said. Because I feel like we're ignoring it. You mean me going to Tartarus? Said Nico. You've already made your feelings about that clear many times. Will stared at the ceiling as if wondering why he had to be the voice of reason. Whether or not it's a trap, he said, it's still a trip to Tartarus. And I'm not a fan of those lines in the prophecy. There leaves somebody of equal value behind, or your body and soul no one will ever find. Bit of a forced rhyme structure there, Mr. D noticed between crunching. Chiron shot him a dirty look. I'm not ignoring that part, he said to Will. And I agree, without more information, we could never sanction such a dangerous quest. I don't need a quest, Nico stood, hearing Rachel's prophecy again. Hearing it discussed aloud made him feel suddenly resolved. Or maybe he was just feeling contrary and cranky after enduring Nico's greatest nightmare hits. Volumes 1 and 2, I have to go. Chiron's expression was heavy and sad. Perhaps he was remembering all the other heroes he had trained over the centuries, who had said, I have to go, and then never returned. Nico, we are in a period of relative peace. In recent months, we have learned at great personal cost that prophecies can be manipulated or just plain malicious. No offense to Miss Dare. None taken, Rachel muttered. I'm just happy to be spewing green gas again. It would be better for you to enjoy this time off, Chiron continued. To heal instead of running after. You're not the one being tormented in your dreams. Nico immediately wished he hadn't blurted it out like that. If Bob really was in danger, doing whatever he could to reach out for help, then he was the one being tormented. No matter how painful Nico's dreams were, Tartarus was worse. On the other hand, if something were tormenting an immortal titan like Bob, and being older than the gods, what chance would Nico stand against such a force? Is that what you were dreaming about? Will's voice steered him from his thoughts. Bob in Tartarus? Not exactly, Nico said. At least, not directly. He decided to tell them everything. Good, that's nice to hear. Catch them up. He started with a long summer of frequent flashbacks and nightmares. Clearly, Mr. D wasn't interested in that part, since he'd heard all of it already. Instead of listening, he continually tossed popcorn into the air and tried to catch it with his mouth. He missed a lot. We're the same person. Nico took as proof that he was not the god of hand-eye coordination. As soon as Nico got to last night's greatest hits parade of trauma, though, Mr. D hung on every word. Fascinating, Mr. D said once Nico had finished. I know that mortal dreams worlds are confusing, elaborate, and vivid, but that marathon sounds absolutely absurd. Thanks, I guess, said Nico. Look, the point is that every memory, every thought and emotion in my head is screaming at me to listen. And Bob is the one who's calling out. It could be a trap, but I don't think so. Bob is suffering down there. He needs my help. And Rachel's prophecy getting stuck on repeat. I think that means the situation is getting worse. Bob is running out of time. I have to try and help him. Dionysus picked a fleek of popcorn from his godly teeth. I thought your father made it so no one alive could ever enter his realm anymore, he said. You know, after the whole doors of death business, that is news to me. Or was it in Trials of Apollo? If something was mentioned or something happened in Trials of Apollo, not Solangelo related, I have forgotten it. That doesn't mean I shouldn't go, said Nico. There's always a way into the underworld, and my father doesn't need to know. I have to try. Rachel shivered. But leave something of equal value? That's the part I can't wrap my mind around. Equal value to what? Bob's life? Will's blue eyes fastened onto Nico. He had that slightly worried, slightly exasperated expression he got when one of his patients didn't follow doctor's orders. Nico, you can't trade one life for another. Please tell me you've never considered abandoning someone else in Tartarus to save Bob. Or even worse, sacrificing yourself. Nico tamped down a wave of irritation. Of course that thought had occurred to him too, and his parade of nightmares, all featuring people he had lost, only heightened his fears. But he had to help Bob. He had delayed as long as he could. You're assuming this is a rescue mission, he said. What if Bob needs my help with something but also wants to stay in Tartarus? Mr. D cackled. Who would want to stay in a realm of nightmares? Or maybe the equal value thing isn't a life for a life, Nico suggested weakly. Maybe Bob wants to bring something back with him, like his broom or something, and he needs a broom of equal value? Will gave Nico a look that said, come on, you don't really believe that, do you? And anyway, Nico forged ahead, a mortal life couldn't be equal to the life of a titan, would it? Mr. D nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at Chiron. The boy makes a good point. We mortals are clearly bigger ticket items. Chiron frowned. We know so little about all of this, Nico, and Tartarus, well, it's not a place where any of us should venture, mortal or immortal. Percabeth are inclined to agree. But I've been there, said Nico. Did you all forget that I'm one of only 3 demigods who've ever come back from that wretched place alive? And I survived there the longest. If anyone can help Bob, it's me. I can do this on my own. Will marched over and grabbed Nico's hand. Well, that's not happening. If you go, I'm going with you. Nico laughed. No, you're not. That's the one thing that makes me okay with this quest, that I'm not putting you in danger. Excuse me, noble max sacrifice, Will said. We're both perfectly capable of survival. Chiron's hooves clopped nervously on the floorboards, but a child of Apollo in Tartarus? Will's face fell. I can manage. Nico squeezed his hand. Will, you're a child of the sun. Where I'm going, there's no sunlight down there. I know that seems obvious, but it's a lot worse than you're probably picturing. The true nature of Tartarus, I never want you to have to experience that. So your clever plan, said Will, is to sneak into the underworld by yourself, hoping your father doesn't notice, then slip down into Tartarus and what, bring Bob back here? Nico shrugged. I just want to give him a choice. He could go anywhere in the world, or if Bob wants to stay at camp, why not? He could build his own cabin, or... Oh, could he? Mr. D interrupted. You're talking about releasing an allegedly reformed titan into the world. I am putting a great deal of emphasis on allegedly. You can't just make a decision like that without consulting the camp leadership, which would be, oh yes, me. For once, said Chiron, I agree with Mr. D. This is an extraordinarily dangerous idea. What options do I have at this point? Nico growled. Wait until my nightmares get so bad my head explodes? Wait until Rachel is spewing that prophecy 24 hours a day? Would not be my first choice, Rachel admitted. I must say, however, Mr. D interjected, this is better than any human film I've ever seen. The drama, the twist. I should have made a second bowl of popcorn. That's what I say every Friday night. Nico turned to face Chiron. I can't let this keep happening. Someone is begging me for help, and I just can't sit here and ignore it. The old centaur bowed his head, as if he were already contemplating the words he would have to write on Nico's tombstone. I can see that I won't be able to dissuade you, no matter how foolish your plan. But even if I grant you a formal quest, you're forgetting a very important detail. To succeed, a quest needs 3 people. That is tradition. That is the sacred number. Nico shook his head. I thought about that. Percy and Annabeth went through Tartarus, just the 2 of them. He glanced at Will. If my stubborn boyfriend insists on going, I do, then Will and I can do the same. We're just as good a team. Besides, if we do find Bob, that'll bring the number up to 3. A fair point, Chiron conceded grudgingly. But if you do need to leave something behind, or someone, it was second nature for Nico to assume the worst, but at the moment he wished that his brain was wired for a little more optimism. If saving Bob truly required Nico to leave something of equal value behind, he looked at Will. Nico's mouth dried up instantly. No, that couldn't be it. That would be so cruel. In my mind, to Nico, wouldn't Will be of more value than Bob, so that wouldn't be equal value? I'm just trying to rationalize Will not dying. But wasn't that Nico's whole history? Wouldn't this just be the cherry on the ice cream sundae of his life? Hey, Will squeezed his hand. This isn't some hero play I'm trying to make. I promise you right here and right now, Nico, I'm not going to trade myself for Bob. And you're not going to have to make that choice. Nico's jaw dropped. What? That's what you're worried about, isn't it? You think the prophecy is suggesting that one of us will have to stay behind to save Bob, right? Nico's mouth was still hanging open. I do know you, Nico, said Will, and I'm telling you, that's not going to happen. Wow, said Nico. I feel like I'm standing in front of all of you in my underwear. Nico scanned the faces of the others, Mr. D, Rachel, Chiron. There were no more objections, no more debates about the ethics of rescuing Titans from Tartarus or trading lives to fulfill prophecies. They seemed to have accepted Nico's destiny, which scared Nico more than a little. This was really happening. You know, Mr. D said, breaking the silence, I've changed my mind. You've earned my respect, Nico Di Angelo. He handed over his nearly empty bowl of popcorn. It's not hot anymore, but knock yourself out. Nico's curiosity got the better of him. He scooped a handful and gave it a try. To his surprise, even at room temperature, the buttery, herb popcorn tasted like ambrosia of the gods. You made this? He tried not to sound too incredulous. Like, magically? Oh, no magic, Mr. D said. I watched some videos on that YouTube thing. Some fellow named Alton Brown taught me the perfect recipe. Now I have to look that one up. Alton Brown, perfect popcorn recipe. Nico stared at him, but the god didn't seem to be joking. Look at you, learning new things. I may be older than the entire country, but I've still got a few tricks up my sleeves. I don't think I've ever seen you wear anything that had sleeves. Mr. D winked. Exactly. Anyway, Will broke in. Before I change my mind, are we good here? Will turned to Chiron. Is this quest official? The centaur took a deep breath. Nico Di Angelo, that's me, Nico said. Do you accept this quest that's been laid before you? Nico hesitated. So much for bravado. He wasn't sure what it would be like to return to his father's realm, or to visit the terrifying, draining reality of Tartarus. Also, between the repetitive prophecy, the relentless dreams, and the voice of Bob crying out from Tartarus, it didn't feel like he had much of a choice. This was all inevitable, wasn't it? On the other hand, he was sure he couldn't just leave Bob down there any longer. Bob deserved help after everything he'd done and everything he'd had to endure. I accept, Nico said. Mr. D clapped. Bravo, Nico. He's suddenly British. Bravo, Nico. You've had yourself a quest. More importantly, you've given me the most entertaining night I've had in Camp Blood in months. Chiron looked much less excited. Will squeezed Nico's hand, but Nico could feel the tremble of his fingers. Rachel hugged herself. I hope this works, for your sake, of course, but also because I'm supposed to leave for Paris next week. I'd love to be able to make it there without a prophecy smoke spilling out of me in the plate and right over. It will work, Nico said. I know it will. But a small pit of dread settled at the bottom of Nico's stomach. He hoped he hadn't made the wrong decision. End of that small snippet, and by small I mean hour and a half that it took for me to read it. That was a lot longer than I expected. What was that, like 5 or 6 chapters at the end? And they were long chapters. I'm glad they gave us this snippet because it was so good. A lot happened. It started chill, funny, misdirect, and then we had like a cute moment between Will and Nico, then like the most strange and concerning dream sequence that I have ever seen, but I love to see it. And then getting the prophecy and discussion and the official quest. Things I want to see in this book. Obviously more Will and Nico moments. I am loving every single second. It's really going to be focused on just the two of them since it's been confirmed that it's just going to be the two of them, at least until they find Bob and Tartarus. I do want to see Nico call either Percy or Annabeth to tell them that he is going to Tartarus to find Bob. This call would make more sense if it was to Percy specifically, because Percy has more of a history with Bob, and he was like, oh, well, say hello to the stars for me, Percy. We all know that famous line, so I do want him to let Percy know what is going on and for Percy to be worried over him, because I feel like over the years their relationship has been diluted. I know they've never really been like friends, but they have a lot of history there, and Percy really cares about Nico's well-being, I think, and he wouldn't want him to go to Tartarus again, so I think he would be like a big brother to him in that sense. It's not just me wanting to see Percy all the time, okay? I know that's what you're thinking. I see you. I can see you typing in the comments, oh, she just wants more Percy. She just wants Percy to be in everything because she has a basic fabe. Yes, I do. Okay, I'm not ashamed of it. But right now, that is not the reason why. The reason why is that Percy and Nico have a connection through Tartarus and through Bob specifically and through all they've been through. And I feel like this is the perfect time to call Percy, say, what's up, how's uni? Yeah, I'm going to Tartarus. But besides that, I'm just open to anything that can happen. I love Rick and Mark. Their writing together is just beautiful, so enticing. I love the references and I love the snark and I love just like the LGBTQ culture like dashed in there. If you're in the collective or you like watch anything relative to that in media, you can tell that spark and I just love to see it. So yeah. This is probably the longest video I'm ever gonna upload on my channel. Please leave a like if you like this video, comment down below if you're planning to read the book, but if you're watching this video, then I'm guessing you are planning on reading the book. So let me know if you think Will or Nico are gonna die down in the comments. I do not think they are. I am manifesting that out into the world right now. Subscribe if you haven't already and click that bell button so you get notifications every time I post a new video. I post videos just like this, except much, much shorter every single Friday. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Bye! Hello, hello, hello.